Welcome to our 2023 Black History Month presentation. So our theme this year is a legacy of care, and this is taken from the Canadian Labour Congress, celebrating the history of Black care workers in Ontario and Canada. We're so glad you're able to join us. Please sit back, listen, and we hope you can learn something from today's presentation. My name is Leon Simeon. I'm the Society Unit Director from the OPG Local, and I'm also chair of the Coalition of Racialized Professionals. So this presentation has been brought to you from our equity group, Coalition of Racialized Professionals. At this time, I would like to call on Society member Andrew Meikle. He's a senior engineer in renewable generation, and he's located in Niagara Falls, Ontario. So Andrew is going to take us through our Indigenous territory acknowledgement. Over to you, Andrew.
Sure. Thank you, Leon. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the Society of United Professionals operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work here, and we thank all generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. We also recognize the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community, our province, and country as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you. Merci and miigwech. Next is, so this is something that we started doing last year. So this is our third presentation, and we'd like to call on Alika Hendricks. Alika is a Society Unit Director from Legal Aid Ontario. She's also co-chair of the Coalition of Racialized Professionals. Alika, can you please?
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Awesome.
So I've been tasked with sharing an African ancestry acknowledgement, and this acknowledgement was sourced and edited by our Coalition of Racialized Professionals Steering Committee member Lilia Shillingford, who's from the OEB local. It was originally developed by the York Region Alliance of African Canadian Communities. So I'll just be sharing that with you now. One brief moment here. So here it goes. We recognize that Indigenous sovereignty is linked to our collective liberation. The advancement of Indigenous sovereignty is deeply connected to Black liberation, and we remain committed to fostering both. We acknowledge that the many people of African descent who are not settlers, but whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of the transatlantic slave trade, brought against their will and made to work on these lands. We thank you and we honor you. It is with great honor and gratitude that we join those who have led lives of service, those who have stood up for social and economic justice, those who have sacrificed their lives for the sake of this day, those who have confronted and destroyed oppressive practices and institutions, and those who have set affirming and equitable examples for all of us. You who stood against economic exploitation, homophobia, racism, gender discrimination, religious bigotry, and other oppressive forces, we stand on your sturdy, courageous shoulders. We thank you and we honor you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alika. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to call on Society Executive Lori Reed to bring us greetings.
On behalf of Michelle, Chris, and myself as principal officers of the Society, I'd like to welcome you to this presentation from the Coalition of Racialized Professionals. As one of our equity committees, CORP is helping us show the strength of diversity in our union and our workplace. Today, we have a presentation for Black History Month. The achievements of people of color have been underrepresented in the history of Europe and North America. Having a month to focus on those neglected stories goes some small way to correcting that. I'm looking forward to the information that CORP will present today to increase my understanding of those contributions. Leon?
Great, awesome. Thank you, Lori. Joe has informed me that he's not available. He's at an arbitration. So if Matt Biggs, our IFPTE president, is on the line. Can you bring us some greetings from IFPTE?
Yeah, hi, Leon. Hey, thanks a lot for having me and giving me the opportunity to bring greetings on behalf of the IFPTE, our 90,000 members throughout North America. Much respect, and I applaud the Coalition of Racialized Professionals, and I know I also speak for Gay Henson, our Secretary Treasurer, as well. In the lunch and learns that you guys are doing. This one's Black History Month, of course. In IFPTE, we are proud to honor Black History Month and Black workers and the history of Black workers in North America. IFPTE, we want to continue to remember that Black workers, you know, they built the United States and Canada, and a lot of the places that we enjoy were built at the hands of slave labor. And these workers and their descendants have not been properly recognized for the hard work that they've done under slavery and even under oppression, right, which continues today. So IFPT, we're committed to economic and racial equity for all workers and Black workers, and we are a union that does support reparations, for example, for descendants of slaves and those that were oppressed. But you know, we applaud you for doing this lunch and learn. I know you're going to focus, I think, on healthcare a little bit. I'll just end by saying that IFPTE, we are strong supporters of government provided single payer healthcare. We are striving to get it here in the United States. And we are in the fight to preserve the healthcare systems up in Canada, in the provinces of Canada, which are under attack. And your premier there in Ontario in particular is trying to privatize your healthcare. So we are adamantly opposed to that. We stand hand in hand with you guys to protect your government provided healthcare. But with that, thanks, Leon. Happy to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for that warm welcome and for greetings from the IFPT. So for those members who aren't familiar with IFPTE, IFPT is our parent organization. And as Matt mentioned, we're 90,000 members strong. They're based out of Washington, D.C. Thanks again, Matt. So a couple of other acknowledgements. I'd like to acknowledge members who are on the Corp Steering Committee. Alika, you've heard, Lilia and Sharita, who unfortunately can't be here today. We also have a couple of members from our NWMO local, Kofi Ani, Daniel Lamb from Hydro One, and Lehman from the IESO. And if there's anyone else who's interested in joining or being part of our committee, please let me know. We're always looking for allies and supporters. So at this time, if any of you would like to, in the chat, please use the chat for messages. If you'd like to tell us where you're from, whether you're an elected rep, a delegate, unit director, and what local you're from, you can place that in the chat. So today we're pleased to look at a couple of things. So we have someone from the Ontario Federation of Labor who's going to talk to us about the legacy of labor that's done annually, and then we'll move into a legacy of care presentation from the Canadian Labor Congress. So I'm really looking forward to those presentations. So as you know, as always, I start with a trivia question. And so this should be an easy one. It's if you attended last year's presentation, hopefully you remember this one here. So if you can type your answer in the chat, we'll take a look at it. So he was the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters for 16 years. He was Ontario Labor Minister, and he wrote the book, My Name Is Not George. Do we have any? Please type your answer in the chat. I don't see anything in the chat. I'm not sure if I'm receiving the right updates here, but is there any answers in the chat? Tanya Gordon, congratulations. Stanley G. Grizzly, and I have to applaud you for you've got his first name, his middle name, and his last name correct. So I'll be contacting you with a prize, and thank you for that. So last year we looked at our presentation was based on the order of sleeping car porters, so there was a lot of information provided about that. So you know, Stanley G. Grizzly was a president of the Brotherhood for 16 years. He was the Ontario Labor Minister. He wrote the book My Name Is Not George, and there's in fact a park in Toronto that's named after him. So here are some other labor leaders past in Ontario and Canada who were very instrumental in fighting for workers' rights. Bromley Armstrong, Dr. Lynn Jones from Nova Scotia, Fred Opshaw, who was the first Black leader of a major Canadian trade union. He was the president of OPSU for a number of years, won wage increases in human rights language and contracts that are used now in most other unions. So labor leaders past, here are some labor leaders present. So we're honored to have Larry Rizzo, who's a executive vice president of the Canadian Labor Congress, over 3 million members, union members strong. Ahmed Gardaad, Ontario Federation of Labor, he's secretary treasurer. Andrea Bobbington, she's the president of the Toronto and York Region Labor Council, and that's the largest labor council in Ontario, and in fact, Canada. Jan Simpson, president of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, over 50,000 members. And in 2021, Marvin Alfred was elected to the president of the Toronto Transit Workers Union, and Karen Brown, president of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. So I'd like to acknowledge these individuals, these Black Canadians who are in the fight for everyone's rights, for workers' rights, for equity, diversity, inclusion. And now at this time, I'm pleased to introduce to you Yolanda Bedesi. Yolanda is the Director of Human Rights at the Ontario Federation of Labor, which is Canada's largest federation. Included in her portfolio are the Workers of Color Committee, the Persons with Disabilities Committee, the FNMI Circle, and the Human Rights Committee. Please help me welcome Yolanda Bedesi. Over to you, Yolanda.
Good afternoon. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you very much, Leon, for the invitation, and thank you to Society for having me. This is such a great idea. We always talk about Black History Month and how there are so many activities, and this is actually the first that I've attended, so kudos to all of you for what you have done. As you heard, my name is Yolanda Bedesi. My pronouns are she, her, and elle, and I am the Director of Human Rights at OFL. I've only been doing it since the 1st of April, so it's all very new to me, and it's great that this is being done. I know that I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to be very quick and succinct. Thank you so much again to Leon, and thank you for this fantastic PowerPoint. It saved me a lot of trouble. Wanted to just give you a little bit of history, and I'm going to, while I remember, I'm going to give you 2 links in the chat. One is so that you can have a better look at this Legacies of Labor poster. So this is the 5th year that the OFL, in conjunction with CBTU, which is the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, has launched this series of posters. It began in 2019, and the first honorees were Sandy Hudson, Bromley Armstrong, and June Beacock, and I will let you research them a little bit. The purpose of the poster was to highlight, as Leon mentioned, really fantastic labor leaders, Black labor leaders, workers, progressive people, and not just was it a poster, but the idea was that because we are the Federation of Labor and our job is to organize workers, non-unionized workers and unionized workers, there's always a political action spin to the poster. So the first year, the theme was ending carding. And so along with the poster, there was an invitation to participate to fill out a petition to speak with one's local leaders to demand the ending of carding, which we know significantly impacts and negatively impacts racialized people, but Black people specifically. The next year, the honoree was Janice Gary, who was one of my predecessors. She was, I think, one of the first, June Veacock first, but then Janice Gary was one of the first directors of human rights at the OFL. And the theme for that year was the ending of gentrification. We know that we talk about climate justice, but we know that there is environmental racism, and that so many of the things that people with privilege can take for granted, again, have a profound effect and a disproportionate effect on Black and racialized people. The following year, the honoree was Megan, who was the former Canada postal worker. She was the first president, the first Black president here in Toronto. She unfortunately passed away. And the theme for that year was defunding the police. Last year, the honoree was Fatima, and Fatima is one of the leaders with the Toronto Regional Labour Council in the Labour Education Department. And the theme was abolishing racism of all kinds and Islamophobia, but specifically anti-Black racism. And this year, the Workers of Color Committee, and I would like to say that we are desperately trying to change the name because we know that calling it Workers of Color centers whiteness. So we're trying to change it to the Racialized Workers Committee, along with CBTU, had a few names that we were thinking of, but we all settled on MPP Dr. Jill Andrew. And as you can see here, Dr. Jill Andrew is the MPP for the Toronto St. Paul riding. She was just re-elected in June, and she, in her position, is the first ever queer Black female MPP. And so she is making history every day. She's a champion, as you see here on the slides. Thank you, Leon, again, for workers' rights. If you look on her Twitter feed, she was out at Sunnybrook yesterday with the Own Up information picket, standing up for nurses. I know that I was with her on a picket on University Row on the 12th of December. Anywhere you see workers demanding rights, you see Jill. I was with her on the 12th of February. We were in Hamilton canvassing for NDP candidate Sarah Jama. And so I know Jill from different reasons. She's former OSSTF, so she really is a labor leader. She really believes in workers' rights. And she recently passed a motion, and you'll see on the slide, motion 9. Sorry, she didn't pass it, but she tabled the motion. So when we're talking about a legacy of care, Jill has a lot of the hospitals, those are in her ward, those are in her riding. She has a special love for healthcare workers, and the motion that she tabled was to address a significant labor shortage in hospitals and other critical public infrastructures. She wants to increase frontline worker salaries in keeping with the rising cost of living. And so she was very adamant also about the repealing of Bill 124, and is very outspoken about the fact that there should be no taxpayers' dollars, your dollars and my dollars, used for this appeal. She'd like to provide 10 employer-paid sick days, 14 paid sick days during a declared health emergency that we're still in, and address the realities faced by all workers, including women identifying workers and other historically marginalized workers. And we know that in the healthcare system, again, not perhaps with the doctors, but we know that nurses and other healthcare workers, personal support workers, predominantly Black. When we were, SEIU had a strike for Carrie's Place, Jill was there as well. She really is one of those people who practices what she preached. We had our launch of the OFL Enough is Enough campaign, and Jill was there. That was the 28th of January. And so the second link that I've put, but I'm going to put it again for you, is the We Say Enough campaign. And so we invite you to visit that. That is the, it's the political action that we're doing with Jill's poster this year. If you agree that we do, that this cost of living crisis is negatively impacting Black people, people of all kinds, but especially Black and racialized people and other people who are, as Jill would say, forced to be marginalized, please consider going to the website, filling out the petition, and demanding and letting your MPP know that enough is enough. Again, I thank you all for the invitation. I am excited to hear I like to call her a colleague, but we're different levels, but Fatima, to talk more about this, the legacy of care. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. That was such a great presentation and information about the legacy of care poster. You know, it's something that I found that the OFL website and said, this is great. We should really be talking about it and letting people know about it. So I really look forward to seeing more about that and for having you come and speak to us again some other time. Great. So thanks for that. So at this time, we are also equally honored to have with us Fatima Gardaad. She's the National Coordinator in Human Rights Department at the Canadian Labour Congress. She is a community-based researcher, trainer, and facilitator with extensive experience working on programs of dealing with human rights, justice, equality issues affecting Black, Indigenous, racialized communities, peoples with disabilities, 2S LGBTQI communities, as well as immigrant, migrant, and refugee populations. She has a master's degree in environmental studies from York University, where her research focuses on housing and sustainable livelihoods. In her spare time, Fatima is also a filmmaker and passionate about connecting her film and justice work. Please help me welcome Fatima Gardaad. Over to you, Fatima.
Thank you, Leon, and thank you to the Society for having me. Thank you for the invitation, and Yolanda for your great presentation. I think you just need to make me a co-host just so I can share my screen here for my presentation.
Okay, just give me 1 sec. Okay, I'm having some technical difficulties. Just 1 moment, please. Okay, there you go.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay on my end. Oops. Okay. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the legacy and history of Black care workers in Canada. As Leon mentioned, the CLC is currently focusing on, last year launched a care campaign. And while most people think of care just strictly in terms of healthcare, our campaign really focuses on care as a whole. So not just healthcare, but also all forms of care, both paid and unpaid. And so our Black History Month focus this year is tied to that campaign, but we also wanted to take the opportunity to shine the light on the history of workers that we don't normally hear about. So that's why we're focusing on the legacy of Black care. So Canada has, and I'm sorry, I'm looking just to the right because I have 2 screens. So if you see me looking back and forth, that's why. Canada has a long history of depending on both paid and unpaid labor within the sphere of care work, both informally and also through formalized programs. And in the case of Black care workers, this history goes back to slavery. It begins with slavery, where Canada depended on enslaved Black women and Indigenous women who were forced into domestic work to fulfill the caregiving demands of white society. In early Canada, known as New France at the time, African and Indigenous peoples were enslaved by colonizers. The first slaves were Indigenous peoples, then African peoples, all of whom were bought, sold, traded, and inherited in a system of chattel slavery. Of approximately 4,200 slaves at the peak of Canada's slave trade, an estimated 2,700 were Indigenous people who were enslaved until the late 1700s, and at least 1,443 were Black people who were enslaved between the late 1600s and 1831, roughly, before slavery was legally abolished. Though slavery was abolished in Canada, there were very few jobs available to once enslaved Black women. Many Indigenous and Black women found employment once slavery was abolished as nannies to well-off families. Domestic work was the most common paid employment for Canadian women, and that's all women across racial lines at the time. In 1891, there were nearly 80,000 female domestic workers in Canada, again, across racial lines, and formerly enslaved Black women were among their ranks. In the 20th century, with the increase of women entering factory, office, and shop work, the proportion of women working as domestic servants decreased. In 1891, there were around 41% of employed women working as domestic servants, and I say servants because that was the terminology used at that time. And by 1921, only 18% were working as domestic servants. So that number decreased drastically because other job opportunities were available to women. However, for Black women, there were fewer job opportunities available because of racial discrimination. And so Black women were therefore required to continue to work as domestic servants for upper and middle class white families at that time. For example, in Nova Scotia, at the time, Black Nova Scotian women had virtually no legal wage earning opportunities whatsoever outside of domestic service, due specifically again to racial discrimination. So many Black Nova Scotian women had no choice but to work as domestic workers for white families. In the early 1900s, Canada began recruiting young Black women from the Caribbean to enter Canada to work as domestic workers, which was called the West Indian Domestic Scheme. There were two West Indian domestic schemes. Canada had the first West Indian domestic scheme recruited women from Guadeloupe, and on your screen here you see a picture of some of those women. And those young women were recruited to fill a demand for cheap domestic labor in French-speaking Quebec, and Guadeloupe was a French-speaking country, so that's a Francophone country, so that's why women were recruited from there. This first West Indian domestic scheme was very short-lived, though. It only lasted 1 year, from 1910 to 1911. In 1955, the Canadian government launched the second West Indian domestic scheme, this time to attract young Black women, primarily from Jamaica and Barbados, to work as domestic workers. And Canada's racist and restrictive immigration policies at the time presented some serious barriers for racialized workers wishing to work and enter Canada, with the exception of domestic workers, which caused some women to simply accept these jobs regardless of any education or professional qualifications, any other education or professional qualifications that they may have had, simply as their only means of migrating to Canada. And this immigration policy continued up until 1967. A group of 7 women who were dubbed the 7 Jamaican Mothers, who were Elaine Pert, Carmen Hood, Elizabeth Lodge, Eliza Cox, Rubina White, Gloria Lawrence, and Lola Anderson, were domestic workers who came to Canada under that second West Indian domestic scheme. And on your screen here, you see some of those women. Under this scheme, domestic workers from the Caribbean were allowed to apply to enter Canada as landed immigrants, or what today we would know as permanent residents, if they met the program's very strict entry requirements, which stipulated that they had to be unmarried and have no dependents. And it was also conditional upon them working as live-in domestic workers for at least 1 year. To avoid being ineligible, these 7 women sought and received advice from immigration officials and were told not to declare their marital status or dependent children so that they had a higher chance of being accepted into the program, which is what they did. And as a result, they ended up facing deportation on the basis of misrepresenting their marital and parenthood status. They appealed their deportation orders, but had no success. And their case ended up garnering mass attention. And so they proceeded to file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission of Canada in 1978. And they argued that their deportations were due to discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, and gender. But again, they were unsuccessful, including once they appealed the decision. But by that point, a very strong grassroots campaign had sprung up in support of the women. And due to pressure from organizers, this eventually led the immigration minister at the time to state that the women would receive, quote, sympathetic treatment if they attempted to return to Canada. And after taking their case to the Supreme Court, the legislation was overturned just on a one-off basis, which allowed them to return to Canada. Their case led to mass mobilization and support from across the country, and the development of an organizing campaign which sought to challenge the racist and sexist nature of Canada's immigration system as a whole. So it wasn't just about their specific case, but it really was about the system as a whole, and which was led by members of Black communities, of migrant care worker communities, anti-racist groups, feminists and labor movement activists, and eventually garnered widespread support from the broader Canadian public as well. And many new coalitions and organizations were formed out of the activism that came out of this case. And it also led to the establishment of the Foreign Domestics Movement in 1981. So this was really a significant point in the history of Black care workers, and specifically Black domestic migrant care workers in Canada. Now, Black domestic workers were not the only ones who faced discrimination when it came to working in the care sector. Black nurses also faced significant barriers. Black women who wanted to train as nurses in Canada were barred completely from doing so up until the 1940s, when nursing programs first began to be integrated. But just like the case of the 7 Jamaican mothers, progress in breaking down those barriers only came after major pressure from community organizations who came together to advocate for Black nurses. Prior to integration of nursing programs, Black nurses in Canada actually had to go to the United States to train, because the US had begun to allow the education of Black nurses far earlier than Canada. The US started allowing Black nurses to train as early as the 1870s. Starting in the 1920s in Canada, an organization called the Black Cross Nurses managed to fill the gaps in community care that were created by the lack of access to trained Black nurses in Canada. The Black Cross Nurses was an auxiliary group, of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was a political and cultural organization created by Marcus Garvey, and was meant to empower and unite members of the African diaspora. So the Black Cross nurses were not formally trained because, as I mentioned, nursing schools would not allow Black nurses to train. But in larger cities like in Toronto, members took St. John ambulance courses to become better educated on things such as first aid. And the organization was largely made up of Caribbean immigrants who also brought with them generations of home remedies to offer community members in need. And despite the barriers to training, the Black Cross nurses had the trust of community members and were able and also expected to provide care and advice on matters of health and hygiene. So they were still able to fill that gap that was created by the lack of trained nurses. The Black Cross nurses also offered comfort to those who were sick and suffering by sending flowers or visiting people in their homes or in the hospital. And they also helped new mothers to care for their children and clean their homes as well. So that's just a little bit about the history. I'm mindful of time here, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, I talked a little bit about the history and the kind of legacy of care, but I'd like to also talk a little bit about the experiences of Black care workers today. In July of 2020, Stats Canada reported that Black and Filipino workers made up the majority of workers who were laboring in the care sectors. 23.6% of Filipino workers and 20.3% of Black workers worked in care, compared with 13.7% of all workers. In 2021, Black women workers were mostly employed by the healthcare and social assistance sectors. Almost 1/3 of employed Black women worked in healthcare, so 31.7%, and social assistance in January of 2021. And over 4/5, so 81.2% of these women were immigrants. Care workers in long-term care in Canada are disproportionately racialized and immigrant women, and a high number of these workers are Black women. These workers are more likely than non-care workers to be employed part-time and for low wages, despite providing essential care. So the value of their work is not recognized. Much of the work in the care economy is precarious, and for care workers in precarious positions, there may be little support, benefits, or job security. For instance, the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the critical role personal support workers play in Canada's care systems. But PSWs, many of whom are Black, face numerous challenges, including racism and abuse on the job. And with no job protections, they have little to no recourse to address this racism and abuse. And on your screen here, you see a couple of quotes. These are quotes from a study by a professor at Western University. And that study captured the experiences of personal support workers. And these quotes are from two Black PSWs who were talking about the racism they faced on the job. And this is this kind of experience is actually quite widespread. So I talked a little bit about the care campaign at the beginning of the at the top of my presentation. And as I've highlighted today, Black care workers really helped build this country and continue to this day to provide the crucial care, both paid and unpaid, that we all depend on. Despite immense pressures and strains due to our crumbling infrastructure and care systems in this country. So last year, CLC launched this care campaign, and we really want to ensure that we are effectively capturing and reflecting the needs and perspectives of Black care workers as part of this campaign, because as we know, Black care workers are an essential and make up a large part of our care economy in this country. And so we encourage everyone to join the campaign. If you go to showwecare.ca, you can do that. You can also help spread the word online by following our social media platforms. If you go to @showwecare_.ca and use the hashtag showwecare, you can engage with us on these issues as part of the campaign. And we have what we are calling the wall of care, where we're collecting stories of people who are providing care as well as people who are receiving care. And we have a whole range of stories that people have submitted. Some of them are stories of people workers who have had really devastating experiences in working in this economy. But we also have people who are just there expressing thanks and really highlighting how important this work is. And so we want to ensure that that everybody gets a chance to participate in this campaign. So if you please visit showwecare.ca, you'll be able to join the wall of care. And also there's we have our care hub, where we have a bunch of resources for people to be able to lobby on these issues, talk to their MPs, their representatives, and to be able to have meaningful conversations about care and Black care in particular. So thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fatima, Gardaad. That was so informative, and I've learned so much about the care economy and the importance of Black care workers in that economy. So I hope folks on here can go and support the Canadian Labour Congress campaign. I know I've submitted some examples, and if you have any, please do so as well. So that concludes our presentation today. We're so honored and glad that you're able to join us. Black history is not just history for a month. Like for our family, we do celebrate it throughout the year. But I really would like to thank you for taking the time. I see a lot of my colleagues on here. Thank you for joining, for coming to listen and to learn. And also, I'd like to thank our presenters, Yolanda Bedesi from the OFL and Fatima Gardaad from the CLC. Also, our IFPTE President, Matt Biggs, Lori Reed from the CLC, from the Society's executive. Please join us, and we'll be sending out a feedback. We'd love to hear from you what you thought about the presentation. So thanks, everyone. Be safe. I know we all survived the big storm, and let's hope that spring is going to be coming soon. So thank you again, and happy Black History Month, everyone.